We've all experienced level design, whether that be in Dark Souls, Super Mario, or Hollow Knight, just to name a few. However, not all of us know the hardships that come with designing level design and how it can drastically affect the game's overall experience. Join me as we take a little wander into video game development and my time working with level design. This is the unseen horrors of level design. Now, this may be a different type of content on my channel, but it's something that I really want to get into and continue to do from now on. And the fact that I'm even giving it a go makes me feel content, so yeah. Anyway, let's get to the rest of the video. So recently, over the last year or so, I've begun making games and coming up with a ton of concepts for games, most of them being horror. The last game I made was my first ever released game called Lost Communication, which is up on itch.io right now. The game runs for less than 10 minutes with a great atmosphere over like most jump scares, but I think for my first game it's quite good. This next game is a huge step up from that, however, or at least that's what I'm hoping, since I haven't been working on it for very long at all, really. The game is based on the horror games It Steals and Dark Deception, with the player having to navigate through a maze-like level, collecting an amount of doohickeys before leaving and completing the level. And the biggest thing that's stopping me from continuing is, yep, you guessed it, the level design. You think that since I have already made a game, I should be good at this stuff, but that game had you walking in a straight line. So yeah, no, I wasn't good at it at all, and this was going to be my first big moment in the industry. For some reason I had this impression that the level design for this game would be pretty simple, or at least just be a breeze since it's a maze. Yet those are easy, right? But it turns out the level design comes with so much that you need to think about. The fact that it needs to keep in mind so many different attributes absolutely destroys my idea of it being a breeze. Some of these attributes really slow down the progress, such as you need to make sure that the level design keeps the player immersed, which sounds easy on paper, or someone needs to just go and do that, but when you're making it, it becomes absolute hell. Depending on the type of game, the immersion will need to lean further into that type of game or genre. For example, Dark Souls 3 leans into a somewhat linear level design that keeps the player immersed in how its fantasy world is laid out. It tells a story through the level and doesn't require you to read a ton of information put into the game, which you definitely can do, but it's not headfront in the gameplay. One of the early areas in the game, the Road of Sacrifices, does this very well by making sure the player feels claustrophobic in this marsh or worried that they'll lose all of their souls with every corner they take due to how punishing this area is. And the lake in the middle clearly shows the player that it's dangerous. Another game with good immersion is the Resident Evil remake, which still gives me chills after playing it for years. The level design in that game immerses you so much due to how it's structured, with the player having to backtrack and find new things or get scared by new enemies, such as the classic Cerberus in the window. And a lot of this is done due to the great level design and how the rooms create such a heavy, eerie feeling that stops you from wanting to continue, which only fades after you've been through them a couple of times, where you get used to the trends and the mechanics of the game. Speaking of mechanics...
This a burger tank? 3, 2, 1, go!
The mechanics of a game also have a great impact on how it can be played. My game concept has a dash that will allow the player to get away from the monster or jump over gaps in the floor. With this, I need to keep in mind where these are placed and whether it's actually a good spot for it to be, as well as whether the monster can counter the player's dash and find another way around. Otherwise, the player is just going to jump into a large pit of nothing, and the monster will just stand there not knowing what to do. A good example of good mechanic use in level design can be seen in Neon White, which makes sure the player has a good amount of time between consumables, so that they can do their things in their own way without being stuck in a linear direction such as in Dark Souls 3. It gives the player such a high amount of freedom to be stylish and do things how they want. Speaking of stylish, Ultra Kill also does this in a very fast-paced way where you're constantly on the move. The level design heavily plays into the movement mechanics of the game and allows you to once again have free reign of how you pummel demons into the fucking ground.
I am the storm that is approaching.
This is something that is a must for my game and the movement of the dash. I want to make sure that it feels fun to escape the monster, but not easy enough to the point that you have no reaction to it. This plays heavily into the How a game looks will always have a big impact on the way games are played, since it's dependent on what a developer wants the player or players to focus on when moving through a level. And this is the exact same for my own game. The environment needs to shout out at the player what the story of the game is and what the hell happened or why they're even there, which I must say is an absolute must for horror games these days. Nobody wants to walk through nothingness just to be greeted with 1,000 notes on all the creatures. Garden of Van Bam. Besides that, however, notes can definitely be used to great effect, but don't do your game justice when compared to what the environment can do to achieve this type of effect. The Little Nightmares games portray this perfectly with how the world can be told or at least hinted at throughout the world. The Moor in the first game keeps on alluding to this building being underwater, but one of my favourite examples of this is the fact that the world slowly sways from side to side. At first it looks like just a camera, but bam, later on in the game you're shown the outside world and the fact that you're actually on a ship that can go underwater. This is something that's a must for my game and why it's been such a hard time making the level design. I want to make sure that the world feels like it was lived in, much like the liminal space images that have been going around for the last year or so, where you know this was full of people at some point, but now it just isn't. No explanation and no guarantee that you are truly alone, it's just you and your mind playing tricks on you. And there you have it. Those are just some of the reasons why it takes so much time to make a level and make it have a lasting impression on the player who is going through it. And sure, all I need to do is make a maze for this game, but as a dev that's only just starting and has only recently just made their first game, it's going to be quite a big task. I'm definitely happy to continue talking about my game in future videos and my progress, but this was just my way of trying to explain the unseen horrors of video game design. See you all in the next video.